but to love me is better than all things. If under the night stars in the desert you presently burn my incense before me, invoking me with a pure heart, and the serpent flame therein, you shall come a little to lie in my bosom. For one kiss will you then be willing to give all. But whosoever give one particle of dust shall lose all in that hour. You shall gather goods and store of women and spices. You shall wear rich jewels. You shall exceed the nation of the earth in splendor and pride, but always in the love of me. And so shall you come to my joy. I charge you earnestly to come before me in a single robe, and covered with rich headdress. I love you, I yearn to you, pale or purple, veiled or voluptuous. I, who am all pleasure and purple, and drunkenness of the innermost sense, desire you. Put on the wings and arouse the coiled splendor within you.
Okay, I'm Mark Morgan. This is the Egyptian Magic podcast, returning to the issue of a goddess Nuit, or sometimes, well, Nuit, N-U-I-T, is a kind of uh, Victorian way of pronouncing it. Could be Newt, a Nuet. Uh, Usually kind of transliterated as NWT just to make it awkward. Anyway, okay, so I opened this little film opens eventually with just a little section from Aleister Crowley's text or channeled text, something a sacred text that he channeled from his spirit guides, known as the Book of the Laws. Very famous, of course. Uh, and also breaks down into three parts, as all the best bits do. And the first part is devoted to the goddess Nuit, which is also the subject of this um, podcast, this lecture, or talk, or whatever you want to call it. Uh, and Crowley often gets a bad press, of course, but one of the most important aspects from my point of view about Crowley is very interesting, is that he kind of focuses on this goddess Nuit from the Egyptian tradition that in a way is quite an odd choice. You'd think he'd be into Isis and or as more well known at the time, because we're talking about 100 years ago or so now. More than 100 years, 110 years, I think. Uh, but nevertheless, he brings this goddess Nuit, the mother of the gods in the Egyptian traditions, to the fore, and he writes this or channels this bit of both, I would thought, amazing mystical poem and invocation and sacred text to the goddess Nuit. And I kind of always think it's worth emphasizing that when he did that, when he brought that attention to that goddess back into the magical tradition, it was an incredibly perceptive thing to do. People often disparage his knowledge of ancient religions and Egyptology, which has advanced such a lot since his day, and perhaps he didn't always have the best informants. But I think that insight of Crowley, you're never going to take it away from him, because not only is it important in terms of understanding the Egyptian mythical, magical tradition, it's also incredibly important mystery for modern magic and alchemy. Anything you want to include in your magical tradition, all of it will have been kind of adumbrated, will have been covered within the ancient mythology of the goddess Nuit. and this was a particularly important, as I'm going to say in a moment, to people who were similar to the path that some of us are following in the modern world as kind of Gnostics or modern Gnostics or magicians pursuing some sort of deep inner knowledge. And so she's not just an interesting goddess, a very uh, attractive and distinctive and striking goddess within the tradition. Her text and her presence is very much more central to the nature of magic than we ever realized, that Crowley even realized at the time that he was channeling that. This is something that new texts have kind of emphasized again and again, that she is, in terms of her surviving records of mythology, incredibly important and full of mystical knowledge that we really do need, is very, very relevant to the modern world, and is still living because she's connected with the stars. It's a living tradition. So I just wanted to say that with respect to Aleister Crowley, who did so much to revive and promulgate the magical system into our times. Nuit is an important goddess within the Egyptian tradition, and important for all sorts of magic as well, quite now and then. Although this knowledge wasn't always completely known, and as I've been kind of researching this, I thought I should say a bit more about it. She's a very kind of famous goddess. The largest image, I'll put an image on the thing. Largest of all images of gods and goddesses found anywhere in Egypt, in a sort of temple like Dendra. There are these real colossal pictures of the goddess Nuit. Uh, and that is appropriate because one of her main functions is as representing the stars in the day and the stars at night, the whole of the sky, really. So she is colossal because the sky itself is colossal. And a great deal of Egyptian mythology and Egyptian magical ideas and philosophical and theological ideas are connected with the goddess Nuit. And anybody who is interested in um, the deeper aspects of Egyptian magic is going to have to kind of encounter her. The adepts in Egypt itself, which is the existence of the idea of a group of adepts or a mystery tradition in Egypt, is not something that is widely agreed on. I think it's the academic community, if you take their view as being important, say this is contested idea. The idea, obviously, there's religion and there are priests and all the rest, but the idea that there might be a special semi-secret group of people who are not just going through the paces of the Egyptian sort of cult, if you like, the daily offerings and the kind of annual rituals and all the rest, but devoted on a more mystical, Gnostic quest for a higher knowledge of the inner mysteries of that tradition. There are references, even in ordinary hymns, to the fact that these people existed, and I've talked about it many times. How there's a growing body of evidence that there was this group of people who, you could say that they were, at the very least, they were the scribes. They were the people who kind of put together the written tradition, who were there to write letters and to transcribe sort of text from one manuscript to another and make copies of them, and learn the whole art and craft of writing and of composing material. And they, in a sense, they're more important as a social group than the than the priests, who kind of have a certain set of instructions that they have to go through. The scribes are much more intellectual group of people by the look of it. So their training would take a definite period of time, and there's also an initiation. You have to be initiated into that tradition. Uh, the question is when it went further than that, than just the art and craft of writing and transcribing these texts, whether they went into the aspect of interpreting and finding the origin of developing, of actually writing these texts in the first place, not just describing the ones from tradition, but how do these mythological texts and visions come into existence in the first place? Somebody must have compiled them, and for that you need a group of um, experts or people who were initiated into tradition and interpret the tradition from uh, going on. And why I mention them is because the goddess uh, Nuit is one of the important uh, entities involved in the training and the mysteries of this group. It seems to be that anybody who went through a kind of experience, a peak experience in what's known as the dark chamber or the resurrection chamber, they would have a certain set of books that were kind of key to their kind of movement through the system. Kind of like we talk about the people of the book. People usually assume that's connected with things like the Bible or the Quran or whatever. But even in the ancient world, people were very, very um, obsessed, you'd say, with and attracted and interested in books. Those who were part of the literary tradition, anyway. And these adepts would have certain set of special books, canonical books, sometimes called the primary corpus, which they need to know quite well. And they also, as a physical entity, they have to have them around them at the point in which they're kind of undergoing some sort of psychic transformation or journey into the underworld. And I mention that because several of the books that were the part of this primary corpus are always connected with the goddess Nuit. And a little later on, I'm going to read a kind of adaptation of the what's called the dramatic text of Nuit, which comes from the Osirion in Abydos or other places, perhaps because there are other Osirions. And this text is a kind of a drama that what I brought out in my version, in which one reenacts or with this goddess the process of death. You enter into the death posture, which is kind of what meditation is, a sort of calming down, a process of dissolving of the personality and all the physical parts until you get to a point of a one-pointed state, or to a point of stillness at the center, which is envisaged as being in the womb of the underworld, um, but also within the body of this colossal goddess Nuit. And the dramatic text kind of confused people at first when when it was first discovered and translated, because the drama is rather odd. She's kind of referred to in what we think of as quite disparaging terms as someone who actually, even though she's the mother of the gods, she's also quite a cruel mother, I suppose, on the face of it, according to the text, because she actually eats her own children, and and her kind of consort, her partner was the earth god Geb, actually gets into in the dramatic, gets in a kind of row with her about the fact that these children that they have created in the past, that she keeps eating them again, i.e. killing them in essence, which is connected with the idea why we say the goddess Nuit is connected with this thing called the death posture, the death meditation. because the process um, of death precedes that of birth within the Egyptian view. It is like the kind of death and rebirth thing, or kind of dissolving and then reconstitution. So that feature of it, where she's called a sow, a sow who eats her own piglets, is one of the accusations Geb levies at her, and the other gods say, "Oh well, you don't really understand what this is all about." And God, in fact, the god Thoth intervenes and says, "You to Geb, forget it. You don't really understand the process, because all things have to die in order to be reborn, essentially." And this is envisaged as entering into the mouth of the god, this giant goddess of the stars, Nuit, entering into the stars by a process of being eaten, which is also, as I say, death, but also dismemberment, of course, because in order for something to be eaten, it has to be dismembered. In terms of the moment within the astrological year, or the ritual year in which this eating takes place, it's usually said to be around about the equinox. So I was talking about the astrological year, the equinox, primarily the equinoxes and solstices, which is another aspect of Egyptian ritual year that is not well explained or known. People assume it's there, but there's no obvious festivals. They're a little bit secret in their own ways, although they do play a part in the mythology in terms of things like, it's often envisaged as the goddess going away to the south and the great return. And the solstice is kind of the moment in which the return begins, the great return. It's not obvious yet. The sun has gone its furthest south for us, right, in the northern hemisphere, in terms of its journey through the cycle of the Earth around the ecliptic, and its apparent position from the Earth is further south. And solstice is the time when the nights begin to get longer again, although this effect is not obvious for quite a long time. There's a sort of lag, if you like. But whatever, this was envisaged as a point of return. But the other interesting thing that happened in terms of the mythology of Nuit on the equinox itself, just to start from there, which be obvious why I'm talking about the equinox in a moment, is that if you were looking at the night sky, and you were lucky enough to have a kind of nice clear horizon and all the rest, and you were looking towards the west, which is thought of as the place of death, and where the entrance into the underworld and the place of death, the sun would, as all stars do, would set in the west as it does, and the day would end and the stars would eventually come out. And one of the things that you would notice at the equinox is that a part of the constellation of we call the Milky Way, which is another way of envisaging this goddess Nuit. She's the personification of all stars, but specifically she's the personification of what is known in many cultures as the Milky Way, or the celestial waterway is another name for it. And if you look at the Milky Way, it does kind of look like a very long female body stretched right across from north to south across the sky, and we only see bits of it at a time. But anyway, at the equinox, the part of the Milky Way which corresponds to this model of the mouth and head of the goddess Nuit would rise as the stars became visible. That would be the part of the Milky Way that you saw at the equinox. So in effect, the mouth of the goddess would appear on the horizon just after the sun god, or the sun, had gone below the horizon in the west. And you could see how people might fit these things together, that uh, the sun has entered into the mouth of the Milky Way, into the mouth of Nuit, as they're one and the same. And also, it would be as if they'd been eaten by the goddess Nuit. And then there's an elaborate series of mystical texts that tell you what happens after that moment of eating. Okay, so that's at the equinox. So it's no coincidence then, obviously, that 9 months later, which is the human period of gestation within the body of the mother, brings us to the winter solstice. And at the winter solstice, the sun emerges in the east, is reborn. If you're lucky enough to see the sky, how this would be visioned in the sky would be, again, the part of the Milky Way that corresponds to the womb and the yoni, the vagina of the goddess Nuit, would be visible in the skies, in the stars, just before sunrise, where it'll be some of the last stars to appear. So uh, the birth of the god also corresponds with the kind of presence of the birth canal of the goddess who gives birth to him, in terms of the celestial sphere. So that was something that was obviously noticed by ancient people, certainly by the Egyptians, quite a long time ago, and perhaps the mythology is a way of making sense of that. These arrange, or the other way around. Who knows? You explain it. But in terms of actual stars as well, constellations, because you have the Milky Way, but you have particular groups of stars within the body of Nuit as well, which often correspond with particular gods and goddesses. And I think I'm right in saying that it would be Cygnus the Swan that would be visible in the night sky about now. If we could see the night sky, where I am, can't see it at the moment. It's all clouded. And the swan, or the goose of some sort, is often connected with it in mythology with the process of birth. There's kind of bits of folklore. There's the folklore of the stork, which is a kind of sort of, you could say it's almost like a swan, or certainly flying bird, delivering the souls of the newborn babies just before that physical birth. That's a common piece of mythology in places I live. Also within Plato, I think you have this idea that when you die, and your soul transmigrates to another body, having spent a period of time in this sort of limbo, or this other world, before the process of rebirth takes place, that the form it takes in the underworld, or in the other world, whichever it is as a flying bird, as a swan. And you get similar things in Hindu mythology as well. So it's obviously a common ground, a common way of looking at this process of death and rebirth, which is another interesting aspect of the notion of rebirth. We know a lot about the kind of physical resurrection culture of Egyptian way of looking at things, but alongside that is this idea of death and rebirth. Or perhaps death and regeneration within life as well. The two ideas are not really contradictory. They seem to kind of play together. They seem to kind of feed into each other. And this is something you find within the Egyptian culture. So the solstice we're at is why they call it, in lots of mythologies, the birth of the sun. There are some variations on this. It must be obvious that you could have the process of conception of eating taking place at the autumn equinox. and then the birth would be on the summer solstice. And both those arrangements exist within Egypt as well, depending on which bit of Egypt you're in, if you're in the upper or lower Egypt. Sometimes the birth of the sun is said to take place at the winter solstice, and in other parts of Egypt, the birth of the sun is envisaged happening at the summer solstice. And then, you know, you just have to live with that. It's often the way why there are often some contradictions between the different mythological schema. It's often down to the fact that there's no one overall system within Egyptian magic, and why should there be? There are kind of different views according to different people and where they live and the things that are important to them. But the thing that is the same is this idea of death and rebirth being a pattern that is discernible in the stars. And this is particularly important for this time of year, as it happens all these events occur within the ritual year, which we decided is sacred to the goddess Nuit, which spans this whole region of rebirth. It's totally appropriate. And this is one of the things I wanted to explain. So in the little invocation that I suggest for Nuit, I should say there's an awful lot of other things that we could say about the goddess Nuit. She's incredibly important within the Egyptian tradition and doesn't have a temple of her own, but seems to be part of everybody's cult one way or another. They always have representations of her, even if not on the colossal scale that you find at a place like Dendera, which has several colossal images of Nuit. But most of the different aspects of a mythology are all connected with the same sort of thing, with conception and rebirth, or birth, if you like, in the first place. So where she takes the form of the heavenly cow, the cow goddess, which is another important and ancient way of envisaging the goddess Nuit. Again, it's very connected with conception and birth, the cow being as this kind of female, very nurturing entity, animal in real life and in terms of mythology as well. It's also emphasized in terms of the kind of imagery and spells and books that you see in the funerary cult itself. And she's one of these goddesses that can also take on the form of a coffin, and which would mean that she's actually represented as inside the coffin, often on the floor or the lid of the coffin, so that the deceased is kind of enfolded within the image of Nuit as they die and undertake their journey of transformation and rebirth. And this is an image that I've shared many times of the image of Nuit from the coffin of Seti the First at not at Abydos, but from his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, which is a rather magnificent tomb, as most of his monuments are one way or another. And the coffin was taken away by early archaeologists or tomb raiders, if you prefer, and it lives in London now, but which is rather handy at the moment because you can see this masterpiece with an image of Nuit, which I've reproduced on a shroud, which I use in my own version of the death posture, death and rebirth posture, probably we should call it more accurately. And also around the coffin, as I've explained many times, is another important book that tells you what happens within the body of Nuit. And it's rather kind of appropriate that this is carved on the sides of the coffin. So you've got the image of Nuit, into whose arms and wings you're enfolded, and then you've got this description of the different transformations that you're going to undergo within your body before you are either resurrected or reborn into a new existence, which is totally appropriate. Nuit is a very important goddess. Lots of things to learn about her, not just in terms of the broader mythology and theology of what happens to us after death, but what we can do. These texts are made for the living as well. They're for the benefit of the living so that they can, I suppose, broadly say, practice the process of resurrection, or as one of the most common elements of magic and meditation and mysticism is reenacting the process of uh, death and rebirth, or dissolving of the structure and rebuilding it, which has benefits for the physical organism, but also it provides this deep knowledge of the nature of the cosmos, prepares you for the real process of death, perhaps so that you can have a good rebirth. But one way or another, this is the magic, one of the more important of the magical meditations, is the ability to let go of the structure, to understand the structure uh, that appears so solid, but actually can be dissolved, and dissolve it just enough so there's something left, so that it can be put back together again. The god Set that I'm particularly fond of, who is often referred to as the son of Nuit, so their connection is quite strong. One of the reasons would be at that moment of transition in the womb, uh, when kind of you're almost gone, when you're almost being blown away, if you like, all the elements of God. He is there to kind of to finally hold it together and prevent any, this is quite small and vulnerable, prevent any kind of exterior forces from destroying it in its moment of weakness. So Set is there to kind of hold things together and defend the kind of the soul, the monad, from the external, what we would call demons, whatever they are. Just it could just be chaos or whatever. Sometimes physics is quite an important thing. An awful lot of magic historically stems from that process, and Set is there as a son of Nuit to protect the soul in its process of transformation, and because he's there at such a dangerous moment when it appears that you're being killed and brought back to life, um, he's often thought of as quite demonic. It's sometimes why we've talked about it as being a demonic initiation, perhaps unfairly, because the process inevitably involves quite a certain amount of danger, of ego loss, I suppose, used to be the danger they talk about. Uh, and it looks quite traumatic, but almost we have no choice. This is the way the system works. This is the process of of death and rebirth in physical life, but also in terms of consciousness and understanding things. And some religious groups are quite afraid of this process. Magic and the Gnostic tradition embraces it. It's that this is the way things are, and just because you look away and you don't want to think about this, it's too frightening. You want to call it demonic. You're playing with consciousness. It still happens. It's going to happen to you one day, wherever way you look at it. And the philosophy is that the more one is prepared for this, the kind of the easier or more rational a process is, rather than kind of if you panic or whatever. So it's a constant exercise. Perhaps you do this all the time in your meditation, one way or another. You certainly do it every night when you go to sleep and wait, and suddenly something wakes up at some point, and the whole system clicks back to life. So the process is It's not saying this is something you should. This is a description of what of the mystery of consciousness that has all these broader levels, and is also connected with the mysteries of reproduction, um, as it was envisaged. All of these models stem from the reproductive model. Anyway, I shall finish there. I shall illustrate this hopefully with lots of with the such pictures that I have, which are fascinating. Say also in other films we've talked about the decanal system, which is this sequence of steps or time measurement that is also connected with the goddess Nuit. And in some of the pictures, the different decans are described within the text that's written over the body of Nuit. So, but that's a whole another mystery that we're working on steadily. I shall then finish with another recording, appending to this, another recording of my simplification rendering into three parts of the dramatic text of Nuit, which I suggest, as I say in the description again, that you could use this as a model for the death and rebirth posture, because it seems to have this model of entry into death, residence within the other world, which is inside the body of Nuit, there's sort of dissolving and then the reconstitution, and then the process of coming forth. The process of coming forth. Stars that sail out at night to the limits of the sky outside of your body shine and be seen, and in the daytime you sail inside of her, the star goddess, and are not seen. So enter with the sun god Ra, and go forth after him, travelling with him on her body, supported by Shu, who settles you in the night sky, where the sun god Ra sets in the western horizon. Your head will be in the west, and enter her mouth, and she shall eat you. So the so-called dramatic text of Nuit functions as a meditation on death and rebirth. So what I've done is rearranged it slightly to kind of bring out that aspect to it, where the star goddess Nuit is the mediator, really, in Egyptian way of looking at things, of all kind of this process of dissolution and death, uh, and then regeneration inside her body, which is also inside the deepest point of the earth. So, after the beginning, the first passage, if you like, you could have a pause to think about the process of dissolution, of the dissolving into the earth inside the body of Nuit. First of all, she is envisaged as her eating the sun, eating any entity really, eating all of the stars and also us. This is how we kind of enter into the body of Nuit, by being eaten, which is in a sense like being dismembered, or I suppose it happens at death. This is what happens to us. We enter into the body of Nuit in their way of looking at this, and we stay within the body of Nuit for the process of regeneration, whether that's the 9 months or the 70 days, in some ways of looking at it, whatever, a suitable period of time for regeneration and silent reflection if you're following this as a meditation. So, as I say, the invocation, which I'll repeat in a moment, begins with the process of entering into the body of Nuit, into the earth. Then The middle part of the poem is, or invocation, is the process of being within the body, of dissolving, and of looking at all the different elements within the life, and going through various transformations which take us back like a fish, which is like a seed really, as like the semen or the kind of egg, sort of moving around, which is the way they would have seen it. All of this is modeled on reproduction, the kind of gradual putting back together of the body through the various transformations, and then the final bit is likened to the point of sunrise when one comes out of the underworld, out of the body of Nuit, and is reborn, regenerated into a new life. And this is a envisages as a continuous, eternal cycle of death and rebirth, which in the meditation, in the poem, one reenacts in one's mind's eye in a form of a meditation. Stars that sail out at night to the limits of the sky outside of your body shine and be seen, and in the daytime you sail inside of her, the star goddess, and are not seen. So enter with the sun god Ra, and go forth after him, travelling with him on her body, supported by Shu, who settles you in the night sky, where the sun god Ra sets in the western horizon. Your head will be in the west, and enter her mouth, and she shall eat you. You stars go into the earth, you die and enter the Duat, and stop in the house of Geb for a while, regenerating, losing your impurities to the earth. Then, as a shining star, rise again at the end of the period of regeneration. Tears may fall, and become as fish in a lake where the life of a star begins. As a fish, it grows and goes
Thus
forth
is
from the
all life
water.
seen.
From the
The
sea it
stars will
flies
go
upwards to the
forth.
sky.
Outside
From
of
its
me, the
former
sky
self it
goddess knew
flies
it,
upwards to the
proceeding as
sky,
they do
and
and
with its former
returning.
self
This
it
never
rises as a
ending
star,
cycle of
with
death
all other
and
stars that
rebirth.
go forth from
As
the
the sun
Duat and
succeeds the
withdraw
father,
across the
so the
sky.
new moon succeeds the full one.
Arise as stars, I say, shining forth from the deep, your burials like those of men. This period in the Duat just right for everything that has to be done for regeneration. As souls, you travel inside the sky at night, and then by day withdraw to the boundaries of the sky, invisible to sight when seen by the living. It is indeed as a star, making its journey and shining forth in the sky in the hours of the night, travelling the sky to the end.